In the year 1919, a pivotal moment in the annals of scientific exploration unfolded as Sir Arthur Eddington embarked on expeditions to the distant shores of Brazil and the serene island of Principe. His mission, charged with immense scientific weight, was to either substantiate or refute the profound predictions made by Albert Einstein's general theory of relativity, specifically the astonishing notion of space-time curvature in the immediate vicinity of the Sun. This was not merely an academic exercise, it was a cosmic verification of a theoretical framework that promised to reshape our understanding of the universe. It was during this period of intense anticipation, as the scientific community held its breath, that a curious journalist, perhaps sensing the monumental stakes involved, approached Einstein with a probing question. The journalist inquired, with a hint of speculative mischief, what the revered physicist would do if Eddington's meticulous observations were to deviate, even in the slightest, from the intricate predictions his theory so confidently laid out. Einstein's response, now etched into the bedrock of scientific lore, was delivered with a characteristic blend of intellectual humility and unwavering conviction. Then I would feel sorry for the dear Lord, for the theory is correct anyway. This retort, delivered with such an air of certainty, might at first glance appear to be an almost arrogant dismissal of empirical evidence. One could reasonably surmise that Einstein, having poured countless hours, years even, of his formidable intellect into crafting this monumental theory, would naturally feel a deep personal attachment to its validity. The emotional investment in such a profound creation would undoubtedly be immense, and the prospect of its failure would, understandably, be a source of profound disappointment. However, to interpret his words solely through the lens of personal sentiment would be to miss the deeper, more profound truth embedded within them, the essence of Einstein's confidence, the very bedrock upon which his unwavering conviction rested, transcended mere personal preference or professional pride. His theory possessed a unique, almost ethereal quality, a compelling attribute that resonated so deeply with many of his contemporary physicists that they embraced it with an almost spiritual fervor, even before the rigorous crucible of experimental verification. But what, precisely, was this singular characteristic that inspired such immediate and widespread acceptance? The core of it lay in Einstein's profound, almost obsessive, reverence for the inherent beauty and sublime elegance of his own creation. He was so utterly captivated by its aesthetic perfection, its internal consistency, and its harmonious structure that he simply could not, in the deepest recesses of his being, conceive of its potential falsehood. For him, the exquisite beauty of the theory was not merely a superficial adornment, it was an intrinsic indicator of its fundamental truth, a cosmic signature of its alignment with the universe's deepest principles. And, as history now confirms with undeniable clarity, the theory did indeed withstand the rigorous scrutiny of observation. Eddington's findings, broadcast globally, provided compelling evidence that the path of starlight, passing close to the Sun, was indeed deflected in precise accordance with Einstein's calculations, a stunning validation of the space-time curvature. In the realm of scientific discourse, as in many other arenas of human endeavor, the victors, as the old adage goes, are not typically subjected to intense scrutiny concerning their methods or underlying motivations. Yet, the profound statement made by Einstein, the assertion that pure thought, when guided by an unwavering commitment to beauty and coherence, could somehow unveil the fundamental laws governing the natural world, resonates with a startling clarity. It is a concept that, once heard, can echo in the mind, suggesting a deeper, almost mystical connection between the human intellect and the fabric of reality itself. I am profoundly convinced that through systematic intellectual constructions, through the patient and meticulous weaving of abstract concepts, we can indeed discover those foundational notions and the intricate, lawful connections between them that will ultimately provide us with the key, the master key, to comprehending the myriad phenomena of nature. This conviction leads me to embrace, in a very real and significant sense, the justified belief of the ancients. A belief that pure, unadulterated thought, unburdened by the immediate demands of empirical observation, is indeed capable of grasping and comprehending the very essence of reality. It speaks to a profound trust in the inherent logical structure of the universe, and in the human mind's capacity to mirror, or perhaps even contain, that same deep logic. Consider for a moment a phrase that is almost certainly imprinted, perhaps dimly, upon the neural pathways of nearly every individual listening at this very moment. It's a phrase that, for many, evokes a faint, almost imperceptible sensation of mild nausea, a ghost of forgotten classroom struggles. It resonates with the sound of, in a right-angled triangle, the square of the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the squares of the other two sides. For some, the mere recitation of these words might trigger an immediate, almost visceral aversion, a flicker of discomfort in the memory. Others might genuinely struggle to recall its specific meaning or practical application, the details having long since receded into the hazy depths of forgotten knowledge. And it is entirely conceivable that a certain segment of the audience might, at this precise juncture, have already chosen to disengage, to switch off this very monologue, and I, for one, can understand such a reaction. Yet, this seemingly mundane geometric theorem, for its discoverer, the ancient Greek mathematician Pythagoras, was not merely an interesting mathematical relationship. Its revelation elicited in him, quite literally, a state of religious ecstasy. The profound shock of his discovery, the sheer intellectual thrill of grasping such an elegant and fundamental truth, was so overwhelming that it famously led him to transgress his own deeply held principles of vegetarianism. In an act of profound gratitude and exaltation, he is said to have ordered the ritualistic, albeit brutal, sacrifice of 100 oxen, an act followed by a lavish feast, all to commemorate this singular moment of intellectual enlightenment. The sheer magnitude of this ancient celebration, the profound uproar, if you will, was occasioned by the simple, yet astonishing, realization that if one were to construct squares upon each side of a right-angled triangle, the sum of the areas of the two smaller squares would precisely, mathematically, and undeniably equal the area of the largest square. It's a visual and mathematical harmony that, once grasped, possesses an undeniable power. But if you had been fortunate enough to hear this truth whispered directly into the ears of Pythagoras himself, you would have understood something truly breathtaking, something fundamentally profound about the world that surrounds us. For some inexplicable, almost mystical reason, despite the seemingly chaotic and often unpredictable nature of the cosmos, the geometry of the objects that we encounter in our everyday reality, from the smallest leaf to the grandest celestial body, embodies hidden numerical relationships. These are not arbitrary coincidences. They are intricate underlying patterns that suggest a deeper order, a cosmic architecture that our minds, when sufficiently prepared, can begin to decipher. The Nobel laureate in physics, Frank Wilczek, in his seminal work, A Beautiful Question, Finding Nature's Deep Design, poses what might initially strike many as a somewhat peculiar question for a scientist to contemplate. Is the world itself a work of art? Within the expansive framework of a spiritual cosmology, this question, far from being outlandish, emerges as perhaps the most natural and pertinent inquiry one could make. If indeed a powerful and omniscient creator or creators brought the universe into being, it is entirely conceivable that their guiding motivation, the very impulse behind their grand design, was precisely the desire to manifest something of surpassing beauty. At the conclusion of his remarkable book, Wilczek, with the clarity of deep conviction, provides his own unequivocal answer to this profound question: yes, it is. The renowned psychologist Irvin Yalom, a towering figure in the field of existential therapy, meticulously identified meaninglessness as one of the 4 fundamental existential anxieties that plague the human condition, placing it alongside the profound dread of death, the pervasive ache of isolation, and the unsettling burden of absolute freedom. It appears with compelling evidence that the relentless pursuit of this profoundly fulfilling sense of meaning is a driving force that propels individuals not only towards the comforting narratives of religion, but also, quite powerfully, into the rigorous and often abstract realms of scientific inquiry. In this context, beauty serves as a potent conduit, imbuing existence with a sense of purpose and coherence. It offers a framework, a structure that can transform an otherwise indifferent universe into a canvas of intricate design. However, this very allure of beauty, while inspiring, also possesses a more insidious, potentially detrimental aspect. It can, and often does, subtly incline certain scientists to interpret observations through the lens of their desires, to mistake what they wish to be true for what genuinely is. This psychological tendency, this powerful inclination to favor the aesthetically pleasing, can inadvertently shield them from the often harsh and unyielding realities revealed by empirical data. It is, according to the incisive analysis of the German theoretical physicist and quantum gravity specialist Sabine Hossenfelder, one of the principal reasons why theoretical physics has, for over 4 decades, experienced a disconcerting paucity of truly groundbreaking breakthroughs. This provocative argument is meticulously laid out in her own thought-provoking book, which in its English translation bears the title, Lost in Math: How Beauty Leads Physics Astray. One cannot help but wonder if the choice of title for Hossenfelder's book was, perhaps, a deliberate act of defiance, a subtle provocation directed specifically at Wilczek. While Wilczek's original work, as previously noted, translates quite literally to the beautiful question, finding nature's deep design, Hossenfelder's title, Lost in Math, immediately signals a starkly contrasting perspective. Yet, regardless of the nuanced intention behind the naming, the book itself, in its entirety, is undeniably, unequivocally, and without reservation, written as a direct challenge, a formidable intellectual gauntlet, thrown down not only before Wilczek but also before a vast multitude, an almost overwhelming number, of other theoretical physicists. A respected scholar, Vladimir Georgievich, aptly characterized Hossenfelder's book as a veritable knockout blow for those who harbor the deeply ingrained belief that a beautiful theory is, by its very nature, always a correct and accurate description of reality. And the sheer number of individuals, within and outside the scientific community, who subscribe to this particular tenet is, to put it mildly, astonishingly vast. The true scale of this pervasive issue, the profound implications of this widespread conviction, are perhaps difficult for many to fully grasp, or even to imagine. Hossenfelder's book is admittedly a challenging read, particularly for an enthusiastic amateur such as myself. Much of its intricate argumentation, its highly specialized technical details, regrettably remained beyond the immediate grasp of my understanding. Yet, despite the inherent complexity, the author's central, overarching idea, her core thesis, is remarkably accessible and relatively easy to discern. Indeed, Hossenfelder's satirical jabs, her wry and often biting humor directed at her esteemed colleagues, emerge as a distinct art form in themselves. adding an unexpected layer of wit and charm to an otherwise rigorous academic discussion. It is, therefore, hardly surprising that the book has achieved significant critical and commercial success, becoming a bestseller translated into at least 10 different languages. Lost in Math bravely exposed an extremely peculiar and profoundly serious problem, a dilemma that, based on the author's frank assessment, few within the scientific establishment had ever truly contemplated with the necessary depth. Consider the timelines involved in scientific discovery. 25 years elapsed between the initial theoretical prediction of the neutrino and its eventual experimental detection. It required nearly half a century for the Higgs boson, another elusive fundamental particle, to be conclusively witnessed. And a full century passed before gravitational waves, ripples in the fabric of spacetime, could be directly observed and confirmed. These are not trivial durations. They represent immense spans of human effort and technological advancement. The disquieting reality now emerging in theoretical physics is that the time required for the experimental verification of a truly novel and fundamental law of nature may, in many cases, simply exceed the entire lifespan of a single human scientist. This daunting prospect, this lengthening shadow of untestable hypotheses, has, Hossenfelder contends, led some theorists down a path that borders on intellectual desperation, perhaps even madness. The sensation of beauty in a physical theory, she argues, is not merely a fleeting intellectual appreciation. It appears to be deeply embedded within the very architecture of our brains. It is not a mere social construct, an arbitrary cultural preference. Instead, it strikes a deep, resonant chord within our innermost being. When one encounters a theory of exquisite elegance, there is often a profound, almost primal, emotional reaction, an experience akin to standing before a masterpiece of art, a sensation that transcends mere intellectual understanding. Gianfrancesco Giudice, a distinguished Italian theoretical physicist whose groundbreaking work at CERN has profoundly advanced our understanding of elementary particle physics and cosmology, has, in his reflections, meticulously reviewed a multitude of definitions for the concept of beauty. His conclusion, both candid and illuminating, is that we are, in essence, without a clue as to what it truly is. Despite this profound lack of a precise, universally agreed-upon definition, he notes with certainty that we absolutely cannot mistake it for anything else. Beauty, in its purest form, possesses an unmistakable quality, a unique resonance that sets it apart from all other human experiences. However, a fundamental, almost philosophical question then arises. Why, indeed, are certain mathematical laws governing the very fabric of the cosmos capable of eliciting such profound sensations of pleasure within us? This, on the surface, appears to be an almost nonsensical proposition. We are, after all, fundamentally biological creatures, shaped by the relentless pressures of evolution over countless millennia. As the eminent geneticist and entomologist Theodosius Grigorovich Dobzhansky so eloquently articulated, nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. Given this foundational biological reality, why then should we as a species perceive abstract theorems, complex formulas, or speculative hypotheses as inherently beautiful? The human comprehension of the fundamental laws of nature is, by any measure, a remarkably recent achievement, not merely in the vast timescale of biological evolution, but even within the relatively short span of recorded human history. Furthermore, accessing these fundamental laws often necessitates the ingenious construction of sophisticated apparatuses, intricate microscopes capable of probing the infinitesimally small, powerful telescopes designed to pierce the veil of cosmic distances, and advanced computational methods for processing exceedingly long and complex chains of mathematical reasoning. Mathematics itself, the very language of these laws, is not somehow hardwired into our brains from birth. It is a learned discipline, a painstakingly constructed framework of logic. And yet, despite these seemingly insurmountable barriers, we can assert with an equal measure of certainty that our innate sense of the aesthetic, our capacity for appreciating beauty, profoundly responds to the fundamental works of nature, to the underlying principles that govern the universe. This phenomenon presents itself as nothing short of a mystical unity, a profound, almost inexplicable concordance between the human mind and the material world. Could it be, as some have pondered, a genuine manifestation of something divine, a subtle whisper from a higher intelligence? The imperfection that we perceive in the world around us, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, the towering German philosopher, physicist, and mathematician, once posited, is based only on our knowing too little of the universal harmony of the universe and the hidden reasons for God's activity. This suggests that our limited understanding, our inability to perceive the grand, overarching design, leads us to mistakenly label as imperfect what is, in fact, a harmonious part of a much larger, more intricate cosmic tapestry. Consider a discovery made in the deep, silent waters of the Japanese Sea, beginning in 1995. Divers, exploring the seabed, began to encounter exquisite, perfectly circular structures meticulously crafted from sand, each spanning an impressive diameter of approximately 2 meters. For nearly 2 decades, the true nature, the ingenious architect, of these baffling underwater constructions remained an absolute mystery, a persistent enigma that captivated the attention of marine biologists and enthusiasts alike. The eventual revelation was nothing short of astonishing, a testament to the unexpected artistry of the natural world. These intricate works of art were the painstaking creations of a seemingly unremarkable, small fish, specifically the male white-spotted pufferfish. Having meticulously constructed his elaborate nest, the male pufferfish proceeds to adorn it with carefully selected shells and corals, arranging them with an almost uncanny adherence to principles of symmetry. The entire construction process, a labor of intense dedication and precision, typically spans a period of about 8 days. One might naturally inquire, why go to such extraordinary lengths? What is the purpose behind such an elaborate display? The answer, as it turns out, is elegantly simple, yet profoundly significant in the grand theater of natural selection. It is solely for the purpose of attracting a potential mate. A female, upon encountering this underwater masterpiece, meticulously assesses its quality and aesthetic appeal. If the nest indeed meets her discerning standards, if its artistry and structural integrity are deemed sufficiently impressive, she grants her consent to mate. The tiny brain of this 10-centimeter fish, a minuscule cluster of neural tissue, possesses an inherent sensitivity to that which we, in our own complex human experience, designate as beautiful. And it is precisely the male's remarkable ability to create these mathematically elegant, intricately designed structures that serves as the dominant, indeed the crucial, factor in his reproductive success. Here, in the depths of the ocean, beauty transcends mere subjective appreciation. It becomes a genuinely enigmatic phenomenon, a powerful force of nature that directly shapes the trajectory of a species. It underscores a profound, shared appreciation for aesthetic principles that extends far beyond the confines of human consciousness. Charles Darwin, the towering figure of evolutionary biology, famously grappled with profound intellectual difficulty as he meticulously examined the resplendent plumage of the peacock. This particular biological feature, with its extravagant colors and immense, seemingly impractical size, presented a significant anomaly, a challenge that seemed at first impossible to adequately explain within the rigorous framework of his burgeoning theory of natural selection. The peacock's tail, far from aiding in survival, appeared to be a distinct hindrance, an evolutionary liability. This persistent enigma, this unresolved puzzle, ultimately compelled Darwin to embark on a deeper intellectual quest, a journey that eventually led him to formulate the groundbreaking concept of sexual selection. He came to understand that while natural selection, in its most fundamental sense, is a relentless struggle for sheer existence, a competition for survival against the harsh realities of the environment, sexual selection operates on a distinct, yet equally powerful plane. It is a struggle, often fierce and uncompromising, for a mate. The vibrant, almost absurdly beautiful male peacock, with his magnificent display, was not primarily shaped by the need to evade predators or forage for food more effectively. Rather, his resplendent form was sculpted by the subtle, yet immensely powerful aesthetic preferences of the unassuming female. Over countless generations, the cumulative choices of these females, consistently selecting males whose visual displays were most pleasing to their discerning eyes, gradually accentuated and refined the very traits we now find so captivating. Darwin, a man of his time and social class, initially found it immensely challenging to fully embrace this audacious idea, even though it was his own intellectual offspring. His prevailing societal views led him to regard women as somewhat less than fully capable beings, certainly not as arbiters of such profound evolutionary forces. This presented him with a distinct and undeniable irony, a subtle contradiction that must have resonated deeply within his analytical mind. The male peacock, with his flamboyant display, undoubtedly possessed a far more exalted opinion of himself than did the comparatively humble females of his species. Yet it was precisely these females who held the ultimate power in shaping his very existence. In the intricate dance of evolution, natural and sexual selection often operate in a delicate, finely tuned balance. The more conspicuous, the more visually striking a male becomes in his efforts to attract females, the more he simultaneously exposes himself to the ever-present dangers posed by predators. Conversely, the less noticeable he becomes to the keen eyes of his adversaries, the less likely he is to attract the attention of potential mates within his own species. Typically, biological populations maintain a nuanced equilibrium between these competing pressures, ensuring the perpetuation of the species. However, an intriguing question arises. What might transpire if a particular species were granted an almost boundless abundance of resources, coupled with a near-total absence of natural enemies? The answer, as history and natural observation vividly demonstrate, is something akin to the extraordinary spectacle that unfolded on the sun-drenched island of New Guinea. Here, in this veritable Eden, reside approximately 40 distinct species of what can only be described, with a charming degree of understatement, as exquisitely absurd birds. One need only behold them to grasp the full extent of their captivating, almost unbelievable beauty, earning them the evocative moniker, birds of paradise. The island of New Guinea itself, a geological newcomer in the grand scheme of Earth's history, emerged from the depths of the ocean only about 10 million years ago. Consequently, its terrestrial ecosystem hosts a relatively sparse population of land mammals, the vast majority of which pose no significant threat whatsoever to its avian inhabitants. Moreover, within these lush, verdant tropical rainforests, sweet and succulent fruits grow in lavish abundance throughout the entire year, providing an uninterrupted feast. This remarkable confluence of factors, Reduced pressure from natural selection and an overflowing bounty of sustenance has effectively amplified the pressure of sexual selection to its absolute maximum. In this unique environmental crucible, the male birds of paradise have, through countless generations, evolved to devote virtually their entire existence to a singular purpose. They dance with breathtaking artistry, they sing with mesmerizing melodies, and they present themselves with an unparalleled visual splendor. In essence, their lives are a continuous, elaborate performance dedicated to attracting a mate. It's an existence that, frankly, parallels precisely what I myself would be engaged in, were I fortunate enough to inhabit such an idyllic island rather than the bustling city of Rostov-on-Don. However, in a more pragmatic turn of thought, I might, under different circumstances, utter a wistful remark. Soon I will be filming videos for you against a backdrop of swaying palms, were the income generated from YouTube consistently high and stable. But alas, the landscape of online content creation has become saturated with such a proliferation of digital creators that one can almost always be readily replaced by another. This, thankfully, stands in stark contrast to the burgeoning demand for data scientists, a profession that currently holds the undisputed top position in terms of market demand. And this elevated demand is, in fact, hardly surprising. The recent, almost sudden public awareness surrounding powerful artificial intelligences such as GPT, Midjourney, and other neural networks are all, without exception, the remarkable progeny of dedicated data scientists. From this profound societal need springs the often astronomical salaries associated with the profession, ranging from 200,000 to 250,000 units of local currency, and that's merely an average. Crucially, there is no discernible upper limit to the potential income. Furthermore, considering that a significant talent shortage exists for this profession on a global scale, and given that the nature of the work often permits a remote format, you would possess the enviable flexibility to work from virtually anywhere on the planet, even from the most idyllic of tropical islands, should you so choose. In our current, rapidly evolving technological landscape, every endeavor, every professional skill is rigorously evaluated according to two primary and interconnected metrics: speed and quality. It is precisely for these reasons that I enthusiastically recommend a specialized online intensive course, Data Science from Zero in 5 months. Within a concentrated period of just 5 months, this comprehensive program promises to equip you with all the essential knowledge and practical skills required to either secure an entry-level position as a junior data scientist or to achieve a significant promotion immediately upon the successful completion of the training. And this is not merely a conventional online course consisting solely of pre-recorded lectures and passive assignments. Far from it. This intensive program offers an immersive experience, plunging participants directly into the heart of real-world projects commissioned by actual clients. Over the course of these 5 months, you will meticulously assemble a robust portfolio comprising 6 substantial projects, each designed to showcase your rapidly developing expertise. Crucially, throughout this accelerated learning process, you will not find yourself isolated or without guidance. Any questions, any conceptual hurdles, any practical challenges you encounter can be directly addressed and thoroughly resolved with the personalized support of your dedicated mentor. This mentor, a seasoned professional with extensive, multi-year experience in the IT industry, will provide continuous assistance and invaluable insights throughout the entirety of your training. The program itself is thoughtfully structured to afford you the flexibility necessary to balance your intensive studies with your existing personal and professional obligations. However, it is imperative to acknowledge, my friends, that this is an intensive program. It is not an arrangement where one simply pays a fee and passively awaits the miraculous transfer of knowledge into one's mind. Unfortunately, that is not how genuine learning operates. You will indeed be required to dedicate several hours to your studies each day, a commitment essential for rapidly achieving exceptional results and for confidently aspiring to a new career opportunity within a mere 5 months. This investment, I assure you, is truly worthwhile. I have, on a previous occasion, shared with you the personal anecdote that my own brother works within the IT sector, and the stark reality of his professional experience is nothing short of a different universe when compared to any other form of employment I have ever witnessed in my lifetime. The opportunities, the challenges, the sheer dynamism of the field are simply unparalleled. Therefore, if you feel a stirring of recognition, a genuine inclination that this path might be for you, I urge you to take the next step. Navigate to the link provided in the description and submit your application. And as a special consideration for our esteemed audience, utilizing the promotional code ALI will grant you a substantial discount of 45%. Physics, as a scientific discipline, has achieved an almost unparalleled degree of success, permeating nearly every facet of our daily existence. It is in fact remarkably challenging in the ordinary course of our lives to simply glance around and identify anything that is entirely disconnected from its monumental achievements. The ubiquitous glow of our screens, the precise functioning of our vehicles, the vast networks that connect us globally all bear the unmistakable imprint of physics. This pervasive influence stems from a fundamental truth. Physics, at its most fundamental level, offers an astonishingly accurate and profound description of our reality. Or, at least, so it would seem. Our current model of the universe, a magnificent edifice of human intellect, is sufficiently comprehensive that it empowers us to construct colossal rockets capable of traversing the cosmos and to unleash the immense power contained within the atom itself. Yet, simultaneously, this very model is strikingly incomplete. Its meticulously crafted framework accounts for, and describes, only a paltry 5% of the total matter and energy that constitutes the universe. The nature of the remaining 95%, the vast, unexplored expanse of cosmic substance, remains, to this day, a profound enigma, a cosmic puzzle for which we possess not the slightest glimmer of definitive understanding. The most profoundly shocking of these discoveries is the revelation that the primary, indeed, the overwhelming, source of gravity throughout the universe bears no resemblance whatsoever to anything we have ever encountered, observed, or even hypothesized on Earth. This enigmatic, previously unknown form of energy, appropriately dubbed dark energy, accounts for a staggering 68.3% of the universe's total energy matter budget. Our collective knowledge regarding dark energy is frustratingly sparse, limited to the singular, yet immensely significant, observation that it is actively accelerating the expansion of the universe. One of the reasons we find ourselves utterly incapable of detecting it in our immediate cosmic vicinity, or even within our solar system, is that it is incredibly subtly and uniformly distributed across vast cosmic distances. It is only when we consider its cumulative effect over truly gargantuan scales that we begin to perceive its resultant influence, manifesting as the relentless and accelerating cosmic expansion. But the cosmic surprises do not end there. An additional 26.8% of the universe's total composition is accounted for by yet another astonishing revelation. An entirely unfamiliar and unconventional form of substance, which we have designated as dark matter. All that we currently comprehend about dark matter is its remarkably rare interaction, both with itself and with other forms of conventional matter. It is, to put it mildly, remarkably aloof. Specifically, and most crucially, it does not interact with light. From a purely logical standpoint, a more accurate, albeit less evocative designation might be, quote, transparent matter. However, the term dark matter possesses a certain aesthetic appeal, a mysterious resonance that has firmly embedded itself within scientific lexicon. And so, we arrive at the remaining, astonishingly small fraction, a mere 5%. This 5% constitutes everything that is intimately familiar to us. It is the very material from which you and I are fashioned, the substance of every star, planet, and galaxy we can perceive. It is precisely these 5% that are so meticulously and successfully described by the Standard Model of particle physics. The Standard Model, a triumph of human intellectual endeavor, represents our most successful and universally applicable theoretical framework. It precisely describes the fundamental interactions of those elementary particles that are so infinitesimally small they can no longer be subdivided into constituent elements. It is in essence the very foundational bedrock of existence. But again, this only applies to a mere 5% of the universe. For humanity, existing with a profound comprehension of only 5% of the universe's constituents can be an unsettling, even terrifying reality. This existential discomfiture has propelled humankind towards one of the most audacious and ambitious ventures in recorded history. An unprecedented collaboration drew together over 10,000 scientists and engineers from more than 100 nations, mobilizing an investment exceeding $10 billion. All of this monumental effort, this colossal expenditure of intellect and resources, was channeled into a singular project, the construction of the largest experimental facility on Earth, known as the Large Hadron Collider. This immense installation, with a price tag equivalent to 30 times the annual budget of the Vatican City, yields no immediate financial profit, nor was it ever intended to. While virtually everyone has, at some point, heard of it, a significant portion of the general public remains largely unaware of its precise purpose or the profound questions it seeks to answer. Yet, as Paul Adrien Maurice Dirac, the distinguished English theoretical physicist, one of the architects of quantum mechanics, and a Nobel laureate in physics, eloquently articulated, the investigator, in his efforts to express the fundamental laws of nature in mathematical form, must primarily strive for mathematical beauty. This statement encapsulates the profound belief that aesthetic elegance is not merely a byproduct of scientific truth, but a guiding beacon towards its discovery. But where, one might profoundly inquire, do the females of the white-spotted pufferfish, those industrious architects of the ocean floor, acquire such astonishingly complex and multifaceted aesthetic preferences? This remains a magnificent and captivating enigma. Yet, to my discerning ear, they possess an even more enigmatic, more bewilderingly complex, close relative: the male bowerbird. In stark contrast to the often flamboyant plumage and elaborate displays of many of his avian cousins, the male bowerbird presents a remarkably unassuming, even drab, appearance. However, what he creates, what he meticulously constructs, is nothing short of inconceivable, astonishing, and profoundly peculiar. The males of this particular species embark on the extraordinary endeavor of building elaborate bowers, not nests for habitation, but intricate structures with carefully engineered entrances, graceful arches, distinct antechambers, and even meticulously cleared pathways leading to the main ceremonial entrance. In various strategic locations within the bower, the male fastidiously attaches clusters of vibrant flowers, artfully arranges berries, often carefully selected by color, and constructs pristine, snow-white hillocks composed of meticulously gathered bone fragments and pieces of eggshell. And astonishingly, these are merely a fraction of his ingenious design choices. It may strain credulity to fully grasp the extent of their artistic dedication, but on occasion, male bowerbirds have been observed to actually paint their bowers. They achieve this by utilizing the rich, pigmented juice extracted from crushed berries, applying it with remarkable precision, often employing a leaf or a small piece of bark as a makeshift brush. Should even a single berry be dislodged from his carefully arranged masterpiece, the bird will diligently hop back and forth, tirelessly retrieving and restoring it to its precise, original position, displaying a fastidious attention to detail that mirrors the meticulousness of a human artist. Furthermore, different species of bowerbirds construct distinctly different styles of bowers, each with its own unique architectural flair. Most fascinating of all, individual birds within a single species can exhibit their own idiosyncratic styles, a unique artistic signature that sets their creations apart. And here lies the most astonishing revelation. These exquisite, painstakingly constructed gazebos serve absolutely no utilitarian function whatsoever. They are not employed as nests for laying eggs, nor do they provide shelter from inclement weather. They offer no refuge for incubating clutches or raising fledglings. Their sole, uncompromising purpose is that of an elaborate installation, a pure work of art designed for one singular objective: to impress a female. Nothing more, nothing less. But why, one might ask, is the sheer aesthetic beauty of a potential partner's creation so profoundly important to females, so critically significant, that it serves as the decisive criterion in their selection process? What is even more remarkable, more profoundly intriguing, is that we, as humans, also find these creations to be inherently beautiful. Yet we sincerely believe that all of our own works of art, our own aesthetic creations, are exclusively the products of our complex human culture. However, the reality suggests a deeper, more fundamental truth. Many of humanity's aesthetic principles, our innate sense of what is beautiful, are, in fact, shared with other living organisms. Consequently, these shared aesthetic sensibilities cannot be solely attributed to cultural development. It may, of course, be a mere coincidence that we find flowers beautiful, even though their vibrant hues and intricate forms evolved primarily to attract pollinating insects, not to captivate the human eye. And, unequivocally, the point is not that our brains somehow evolved from the brains of bees. Rather, it is the profound realization that both species, entirely independently of each other, have converged upon the very same universal principles of aesthetics. This shared, underlying appreciation for certain visual and structural qualities is precisely why male peacocks, with their dazzling plumage, elicit such immense pleasure in our human vision, to the extent that we are willing to adorn our own heads with their majestic feathers. Yet, the truth remains that the exquisite beauty of the peacock was, in its evolutionary design, intended solely for the discerning eyes of the females of its own species, and most certainly not for Homo sapiens. Hermann Weyl, the eminent German theoretical physicist and mathematician, once articulated a guiding principle for his own scientific endeavors. In my work, I have always tried to unite truth with beauty, but when I had to choose one or the other, I usually chose beauty. This statement, profound in its simplicity, speaks to the deeply ingrained aesthetic drives that can, at times, influence scientific thought. Now, let us turn our attention to the Standard Model of particle physics, a theory that, despite its monumental, almost unparalleled success in describing the fundamental constituents and forces of the universe, is paradoxically often described by physicists as, quote, ugly, Physicists, in their candid assessments, frequently express a profound dislike for its perceived lack of elegance. Paul Davies, for instance, once characterized it as ugly and contrived. Stephen Hawking, with his characteristic bluntness, labeled it ugly and accidental. And a leading figure in theoretical physics, Matthew Stroessler, denounces it as ugly and ludicrous. Brian Greene laments its excessive flexibility, finding its adaptability to various phenomena a sign of its underlying inelegance. Paul Davies, in another instance, asserts that it carries the stench of unsolved problems, specifically citing the ugly feature of its uncertain and somewhat forced method of unifying the electroweak and strong interactions. Hossenfelder, in her book, recounts that she is still searching for a single physicist who genuinely likes the Standard Model. As I immersed myself in her critique, a persistent question gnawed at my mind, a question that likely resonates with many of you right now. Where, precisely, should I direct my attention to grasp this perceived lack of beauty? What specific aspects should I consider unattractive? So, let us delve into the most egregious transgression of this formidable theoretical construct, a construct that, I reiterate, describes the fundamental interactions of all known elementary particles. Its most profound perceived flaw, its most unsettling characteristic, is that it is, to use the physicist's term, unnatural. It is, in essence, an ad hoc assembly, lacking the inherent elegance and inevitability that many believe should characterize a truly fundamental theory. I assure you, this is not hyperbole. There is even a Wikipedia article dedicated to the concept of naturalness in physics. But what, precisely, does this term signify? Does it imply that the Standard Model is somehow not a part of nature, that it stands apart from the very reality it seeks to describe? No. The essence of the criticism, the true meaning of unnatural, revolves around the idea that the theory's parameters and structure are too unexpectedly specific, too finely tuned, without any readily apparent, compelling physical reasons for such precise values. Let us delve into a more concrete illustration to clarify this abstract concept. Imagine a hypothetical physical model that necessitates the input of 4 distinct parameters to generate a highly accurate and functionally robust model. This model, let us say, is designed to perform precise calculations and make accurate predictions regarding certain fundamental aspects of our reality. Through a series of meticulous experiments, we diligently measure the values of these 4 parameters. The results, as they emerge from the data, are as follows: 1.2, 1.31, 0.9, and then, abruptly, a staggering 4 by 10 to the power of 29. A natural, almost instinctive question would arise within you. What on earth is happening here? Why are 3 of these values so remarkably close to unity, while the 4th deviates with such an extreme, almost monstrous disparity? There is an immediate visceral sense that something is amiss, that this configuration is simply incorrect, unnatural, and, frankly, unsightly. This precise discomfiture, this sense of intellectual unease, accurately encapsulates the prevailing sentiment among many physicists regarding the parameters of the Standard Model. As one theoretical physicist eloquently articulates, describing the Standard Model, it is a profoundly, extraordinarily, incredibly unnatural theory. Indeed, he goes on to label it one of the most unnatural things in physics. Drawing from the insights shared by Astray, the current situation concerning the existence and properties of our universe can be vividly illustrated by an analogy. Consider the historical perspective on our solar system. In earlier eras, humanity largely believed that our solar system was unique, the singular planetary arrangement in the cosmos. Consequently, astronomers of that time were fervently seeking a grand theory that would naturally, elegantly, and inevitably explain the precise arrangement of the planets. Johannes Kepler, for instance, a brilliant astronomer and mathematician, was deeply convinced that anything created by a divine entity must inherently possess a profound geometric order. Driven by this conviction, he boldly hypothesized that the spheres of the planets were intricately linked by being circumscribed and inscribed within the 5 Platonic solids. These Platonic solids are, in themselves, truly extraordinary geometric entities. They are convex polyhedra, 3-dimensional shapes possessing the maximum possible degree of ideal symmetry. In our 3-dimensional space, only 5 such perfect forms can exist: the tetrahedron, cube, octahedron, dodecahedron, and icosahedron. They derive their enduring name from the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, who, in his profound dialogue Timaeus, posited that all matter in the physical world is composed of atoms that mirror the shapes of the first 4 of these fundamental polyhedra. The 5th, the dodecahedron, he suggested, was not merely an atomic form, but rather embodied the shape of the entire universe itself. It is perhaps for this reason that the surrealist master Salvador Dalí, in his iconic painting The Last Supper, chose to depict the sacred mystery unfolding within the confines of a colossal dodecahedron, underscoring its cosmic significance. However, the knowledge of these regular polyhedra predates Plato by at least 1,000 years. For example, within the hallowed halls of the Ashmolean Museum at Oxford University, one can gaze upon an exhibit featuring 5 intricately carved stone objects, crafted approximately 4,000 years ago in ancient Scotland. These artifacts, according to one compelling theory, represent early realizations of the Platonic solids, their original purpose lost to the mists of time. So Kepler, drawing upon this ancient wisdom and his deep philosophical convictions, put forth his theory that the precise arrangement of the planets within our solar system could be beautifully explained by the divine geometry of the Platonic solids. Yet, with the immense expansion of our astrophysical knowledge, we now understand that such a singular, naturally explanatory theory is no longer necessary. Given the almost unfathomable abundance of planetary systems scattered throughout the universe, we now grasp that there is nothing inherently natural or unnatural about the specific distances of planets from their respective stars. Such configurations are, in the grand cosmic scheme, simply a matter of statistical probability and happenstance. As Sergei Troitsky, a leading researcher at the Institute for Nuclear Research of the Russian Academy of Sciences, articulated in his incisive remarks, the standard model from an insider's perspective is quite unbeautifully arranged. It encompasses a total of 19 numerical parameters, each of which must be determined experimentally. From a perspective of conventional intellectual expectation, these parameters assume remarkably exotic values. For instance, the vacuum expectation value of the Higgs field, a fundamental constant responsible for conferring mass upon elementary particles, is found to be approximately 240 giga-electronvolts. The profound mystery lies in why this parameter is an astonishing 10 to the power of 17 times smaller than the parameter that defines the strength of gravitational interaction, a discrepancy known as the hierarchy problem. The Standard Model offers no inherent explanation for this colossal disparity, this vast chasm between 2 fundamental constants. Furthermore, it also fails to explain the enormous mass difference between the lightest quarks, which constitute the protons and neutrons of ordinary matter, and the mass of the top quark, which exceeds 170 giga-electronvolts. While the top quark is, in all other respects, indistinguishable from the other, much lighter quarks, it is nearly 10,000 times heavier. The origin of such seemingly identical particles possessing such vastly different masses remains, for now, an unresolved puzzle. One might, as a means of explanation, attribute these seemingly arbitrary values to the actions of a creator, positing a fine-tuned universe where a divine entity meticulously adjusted the parameters of the cosmos to allow for its very existence in the form we perceive. However, such an explanation, while offering a sense of closure, ultimately satisfies few within the scientific community, as it effectively halts further inquiry. Alternatively, one could contend that just as there are countless solar systems, there are likely innumerable universes, each with its own unique set of physical parameters. In this grand cosmic lottery, we simply happen to reside in one particular universe among an infinite spectrum of possibilities. Many physicists indeed adopt this very perspective. While this could certainly be the truth, it remains deeply unsatisfying to some, as it offers no clear pathway for experimental verification. Yet, a substantial number of physicists, perhaps driven by an inherent aesthetic or intellectual conviction, firmly believe that beneath this apparent chaos, this seeming arbitrariness of parameters, lies a deeper, coherent, and profoundly intelligible system. A system that we, with our current limited understanding, simply have not yet unveiled. Werner Heisenberg, one of the foundational figures of quantum mechanics and a Nobel laureate, articulated this sentiment beautifully. When nature itself suggests mathematical forms of great beauty and simplicity, one is involuntarily led to believe that they are true. That is, that they express real features of nature. This statement encapsulates the profound faith that many scientists place in the power of aesthetic intuition as a guide to fundamental truth. Consider for a moment an image, perhaps a pattern of seemingly random spots. Your initial impression might be one of complete disarray, a chaotic jumble of forms. But then, an extraordinary process unfolds within your brain. Something shifts, something clicks, and suddenly, order emerges from the confusion. Everything falls into its rightful place. Your brain has performed the very function for which it painstakingly evolved over millennia. It has assembled the disparate pieces of a puzzle, and in doing so, it rewards itself with a subtle, yet distinct, surge of gratification. You might not have consciously registered this moment, but when you finally recognize the image as a Dalmatian dog perhaps sniffing intently at the ground, you experienced a faint prickle of pleasure, an internal exclamation of, "Aha!" as if you had successfully solved a perplexing problem. This powerful principle, known as the law of grouping, was first elucidated by Gestalt psychologists in the early part of the last century. This fundamental cognitive mechanism is not confined to the abstract realm of psychology. It is skillfully employed by artists, designers, and even fashion professionals across various disciplines. In some of the most celebrated paintings of the Renaissance, for instance, a specific shade of azure blue might be intentionally repeated across the canvas, appearing as part of various, seemingly unrelated objects. Similarly, the same recurring color might be utilized in the halos of saints, the folds of their garments, and the flowing strands of their hair. The astute artist, rather than employing an endlessly diverse palette of colors, deliberately limits their selection. They understand that the human brain craves and derives pleasure from this very act of perceptual grouping, just as it found satisfaction in organizing the scattered spots of the Dalmatian into a coherent form. The same underlying principle extends elegantly into the realm of fashion. When an individual, perhaps a young woman, ventures into a boutique with the intention of purchasing a vibrant red skirt, an experienced and perceptive sales associate will instinctively suggest a complementary red scarf. Similarly, almost every man, when selecting a necktie, intuitively understands that a particularly stylish choice involves matching its color to the subtle hues of his eyes. The pervasive influence of the law of grouping, therefore, clearly indicates something profoundly fundamental about the organization and functioning of the human brain. But why do we possess this peculiar and computationally incredibly complex ability? The answer lies deep within our evolutionary history. Grouping mechanisms evolved as a crucial survival strategy, enabling our ancestors to overcome camouflage and detect vital objects amidst a chaotic environment. If I were to ask you what is the purpose of your vision, you might offer a poetic response, something akin to bear witness to the grand tapestry of existence. While undeniably beautiful, the raw truth is that vision, from an evolutionary perspective, primarily developed for much more pragmatic, survival-oriented functions: to identify, to deftly avoid, to relentlessly pursue, to effectively consume, and to successfully mate with other objects and organisms in the environment. Imagine for a moment your ancient ancestors confronted with a complex visual scene, a dense thicket of foliage. In a mere fraction of a second, their brains would engage in an internal monologue, a lightning-fast computation. What is the probability that all these fragments of the same color are simply a pure coincidence? Let us assume that probability is 0, just in case. Yes, let's proceed on the assumption that they belong to one and the same entity. Therefore, I shall mentally glue them together to form a coherent shape. Oh dear, it seems I need to flee. This seemingly mysterious ability to mentally group disparate visual elements, to connect the dots, so to speak, quite literally represented the difference between life and death in the wild. When we meticulously select clothing and accessories with taste, many of us remain entirely unaware that we are, in fact, enacting a profound principle deeply embedded in the organizational structure of our brains, specifically, the ancient life-saving capacity to discern and identify predators. Edward Arthur Milne, the distinguished astrophysicist, eloquently stated, "Beauty is a road to knowledge, or more precisely, the only knowledge worth possessing." This profound sentiment encapsulates the conviction that aesthetic appeal is not merely superficial, but a powerful guide to deeper truths. In their pursuit of a Dalmatian, a coherent pattern from the chaos, physicists attempted to assemble the puzzle. They extended the standard model, christening their proposed expansion with an appropriately beautiful name, the hypothesis of supersymmetry. Supersymmetry, in its theoretical formulation, appears far more natural and promises to resolve many of the perplexing problems currently afflicting modern physics. However, despite the frequent utility of its intricate mathematical apparatus across diverse branches of physics, supersymmetry, as of now, exists solely on paper, a collection of elegant mathematical formulas. The colossal Large Hadron Collider, a $10 billion endeavor constructed with the explicit aim of experimentally confirming its existence, has, contrary to the confident expectations of many physicists, thus far yielded no tangible evidence of supersymmetric particles. This absence of empirical validation presents a significant challenge to the theory's status as a description of physical reality. In 1930, Wolfgang Pauli, a brilliant and somewhat reluctant physicist, postulated the existence of a new, elusive particle, the neutrino. His bold hypothesis was conceived as a desperate, last-ditch effort to explain the mysterious and perplexing loss of energy observed during radioactive decay processes. He famously described his own proposition as a, to it, quote, desperate remedy, and confessed to his colleague, the astronomer Walter Baade, "Today, I have done something terrible, something no theoretical physicist should ever do. I have hypothesized a particle that can never be confirmed or refuted experimentally." Yet, history, in its own unpredictable way, often reaches surprising conclusions. The existence of the neutrino was, against Pauli's initial pessimistic assessment, experimentally confirmed a mere quarter-century later. Hossenfelder critically notes that, ever since Pauli's initial, groundbreaking, albeit reluctant, act of postulating a new particle, this practice has become the preferred pastime, the beloved intellectual pursuit of theoretical physicists. The scientific literature is now replete with a bewildering array of hypothetical particles, axions, SIMPs, strongly interacting massive particles, WIMPs, weakly interacting massive particles, and so forth. We even possess entire categories of unparticles, conceptual entities that exist purely within the mathematical framework of theory. Yet, not a single one of these has ever been conclusively detected. Despite this complete absence of empirical evidence, their intricate properties are meticulously described in thousands upon thousands of published scientific articles, forming a vast, self-referential web of theoretical possibility. Hossenfelder asserts with a bluntness that underscores her frustration that physicists have conjured unimaginable theories. She observes that, throughout her 2 decades in theoretical physics, the vast majority of her acquaintances and colleagues have forged successful careers by diligently researching phenomena that no one has ever actually observed. The prevailing strategy, she explains, is to postulate that the creation of one's hypothetical particle would require an extraordinarily high energy threshold, or that it interacts so infrequently and weakly with ordinary matter that the sensitivity of existing detectors is simply insufficient to register its presence. Often, both conditions are invoked simultaneously. For example, the most widely accepted explanation for the pervasive enigma of dark matter is that it consists of some as yet undiscovered type of particle. However, a crucial question remains. Who definitively stated that dark matter must, by its very nature, be composed of particles? Observations of certain galaxies, for instance, reveal specific patterns and irregularities that a dark matter model composed solely of particles is simply incapable of explaining. If we strictly adhere to the particle-based dark matter model, we find ourselves unable to account for various cosmic anomalies. For instance, we cannot adequately explain why our own Milky Way galaxy possesses fewer satellite galaxies than predicted by simulations, or why the existing ones are found to lie almost entirely within a single, highly flattened plane. It is possible, of course, that these perceived flaws in our understanding are merely artifacts, products of astrophysical processes that have not yet been properly incorporated or fully accounted for within our current, finely tuned cosmological model. Or perhaps they are telling us something far more profound, that we are fundamentally misunderstanding something about the universe itself, that our theoretical framework is missing a crucial piece of the cosmic puzzle. The terrifying question, one that most scientists likely strive to avoid contemplating too deeply, is this: what if we have, in fact, reached the absolute limits of experimental verifiability? It might very well be that in order to definitively confirm certain hypotheses, we would require a particle collider of unimaginable scale, perhaps one the size of Jupiter, orbiting a neutron star. According to the author of the book, such a colossal apparatus would be necessary to even hope to detect the graviton, the hypothetical quantum of the gravitational field. What, then, are we to do if we are no longer capable of empirically testing our grand hypotheses? Deprived of this essential capacity to turn the wheel of scientific progress, some theoretical physicists have, quite remarkably, invented their own idiosyncratic method for evaluating theories, concluding by decree. Sean Carroll, a renowned cosmologist, is famously willing to bet his dog on the existence of the multiverse. André Linde, another prominent cosmologist, is prepared to wager his entire life on it. And Steven Weinberg, a towering figure in physics, professes such a high degree of certainty in the multiverse that he is willing to stake the lives of both André Linde and Carol's dog on its validity. And here lies a truly ironic twist. This is the same Steven Weinberg who, at an earlier point in his illustrious career, famously asserted that the interpretation of general relativity was utterly devoid of significance. He dismissed the concept of space-time curvature as empty poetry, arguing that the only thing that truly mattered was whether a theory yielded successful predictions. David Deutsch, in his profound and influential book The Fabric of Reality, was a vocal critic of such instrumentalist views, and specifically called out Weinberg, casting doubt on the underlying motivations behind his philosophical stance. It appears Deutsch was not mistaken. Weinberg, a co-creator of the Standard Model, clearly had an innate need for a coherent and elegant picture of the world, even if that picture could not be experimentally verified, and even, remarkably, if it offered no new predictive power. This suggests a powerful, perhaps unconscious drive for aesthetic and intellectual completeness, even in the absence of empirical support. George Ellis, an esteemed honorary professor at the University of Cape Town and a leading figure in the field of cosmology, observes that a disturbing trend has emerged in contemporary physics. He notes that there are now physicists who openly or implicitly declare that their ideas do not require the crucible of experimental verification, simply because their ideas are, in their estimation, inherently so good. Ellis staunchly believes that any weakening of the criterion of falsifiability, the requirement for theories to be testable, would constitute a catastrophic regression for science, effectively setting it back a millennium. But what if, just what if, this perspective is flawed? What if we are mistaken? Why are we so reluctant to assert that there exists something intrinsic within the very architecture of our brains, a capacity that can guide us towards a correct understanding of the world, bypassing the necessity of every single experiment? What gives us such unwavering certainty that all knowledge is acquired solely through empirical means? Are you absolutely convinced that you possess no innate, hardwired knowledge about the world? Why are we so adamantly convinced that Einstein was incorrect when he mused about the capacity of pure thought by itself to unveil the fundamental laws of nature? Allow me to present a more complete, a more nuanced excerpt from his profound statement that opened this discussion. Einstein, with his characteristic blend of philosophical insight and scientific rigor, articulated, "Preceding experience convinces us that nature is the realization of the simplest mathematically conceivable elements. I am convinced that through purely mathematical constructions we can find those concepts and the lawful connections between them that will give us the key to understanding the phenomena of nature. Experience can suggest the appropriate mathematical concepts to us, but they can in no way be deduced from it. Of course, experience remains the sole criterion of the suitability of mathematical constructions in physics, but the true creative principle lies in mathematics." He continued, "Therefore, I consider the belief of the ancients, that pure thought is capable of grasping reality, justified in a certain sense. But who were these ancients, of whom Einstein spoke with such reverence?" His reference unmistakably points to figures like Plato, who, in his celebrated dialogue Schottersnod, brilliantly illustrated the presence of innate knowledge within humanity, knowledge that exists within us, prior to any empirical experience. Plato's argument is delivered with remarkable persuasive power, particularly through the compelling example of a conversation between Socrates and a young, uneducated slave boy. This boy, utterly ignorant of geometry, yet guided by Socrates, skillfully posed questions and without any direct hints or explicit instruction, independently arrives at a clear and accurate formulation of the Pythagorean theorem. He achieves this profound insight purely through the process of thoughtful reflection and logical deduction. This raises a truly fundamental question. How can an individual, utterly devoid of any formal geometric training, possess such an accurate and correct intuition regarding geometric figures? This intellectual feat, achieved purely through internal reasoning, deeply challenges the notion that all knowledge is derived solely from experience. After encountering this compelling dialogue, a question spontaneously arose in my own mind, a question that perhaps has never truly occurred to you. Have you ever paused to truly ponder what geometric figures actually 20? Seriously, what are they? Why does no one, across diverse cultures and educational backgrounds, experience any difficulty whatsoever in grasping the very concept of a triangle, a circle, or a square? From an evolutionary perspective, geometric figures are, to put it mildly, not something that ubiquitously appears in their perfect, idealized forms throughout nature. If, for example, we were to discover a perfectly formed pyramid on the surface of Mars, you can be certain that every scientist and observer would immediately declare it to be an artificial structure, an undeniable product of intelligent design, rather than a natural geological formation. The mysterious hexagonal storm at Saturn's North Pole, for instance, a naturally occurring, six-sided cloud pattern, continues to perplex scientists. We are still striving to fully comprehend its origins and enduring stability. This highlights our inherent bias. Geometric perfection implies design. It is relatively straightforward to explain why, from an evolutionary standpoint, a landscape panorama, perhaps a verdant valley with a flowing river bathed in warm sunlight, surrounded by lush trees, is universally perceived as beautiful and elicits feelings of pleasure and comfort. Such an environment contains all the essential elements that aided the survival of our ancestors: readily available water, life-sustaining sunlight, and shelter-providing trees. These are immediate, tangible benefits. But how, then, do we explain why we find abstract patterns, intricate fractals, or complex mathematical equations beautiful? What evolutionary advantage is derived from appreciating these forms? Leon Lederman, a distinguished physicist and Nobel laureate, famously asserted, "We believe that nature is best described by equations that are as simple, beautiful, compact, and universal as possible." This profound statement encapsulates the aesthetic ideal that guides many physicists in their quest for fundamental theories. Consider for a moment the magnificent architectural wonders of antiquity, those grand structures that continue to inspire awe and admiration. Yet we often forget a crucial fact. We only perceive those structures that, against all odds, have managed to endure the ravages of time. The vast majority of ancient constructions, particularly the more innovative or experimental ones, crumbled and fell, often very shortly after their completion. This widespread failure stemmed from a fundamental limitation. Ancient architects and builders relied upon a rather specific blend of intuition, accumulated empirical skills, and implicit, often unarticulated, theoretical dependencies. These constituted their engineering knowledge, but it was a knowledge that was not yet sufficiently complete, not deep enough, and certainly not distilled and refined to its purest essence. The ancient builder, for all his practical skill, would have been largely incapable of articulating the vast majority of this knowledge in the precise language of mathematics and physics. He could not have written down the fundamental principles in the form of elegant equations. Consequently, he would have been utterly unable to definitively explain why the grand edifice he so painstakingly constructed ultimately collapsed. Conversely, if 1,000 individuals were to read a complex literary work, they would, in effect, each read 1,000 different books, each interpreting the narrative through the unique lens of their own experiences and understanding. But if 1,000 individuals were to read a single mathematical equation, they would, without exception, read the exact same equation. Such is the clarity and precision of mathematical language, stripped bare of all ambiguity and subjective interpretation. It is for this very reason that today, it is an exceedingly rare occurrence for a structure, even one of unprecedented design or complexity, to collapse due to a fundamental flaw in its construction. Our refined, deeply theoretical knowledge, our ability to precisely model and predict the behavior of materials and forces, allows us to erect structures that ancient architects could scarcely have dreamt of. Colossal skyscrapers that pierce the clouds, or intricate space stations that orbit our planet. The modern engineer possesses such a profound and comprehensive understanding of the fundamental principles governing the universe, particularly in the domain of structural mechanics and material science, that they can confidently apply these principles to virtually any conceivable construction project. Whether the edifice is to be fashioned from novel alloys or traditional stone, whether it is to be situated on the lunar surface, beneath the crushing pressures of the deep sea, or in any other extreme environment, our refined theoretical knowledge allows us to design with an unprecedented degree of reliability. If, for the past 5 minutes, you have felt as though I have been meandering through a collection of seemingly disparate and unconnected ideas, then firstly, I extend my profound gratitude for your patience. And secondly, allow me to clarify my underlying intention. I mean to convey that our innate human capacity to discern patterns, to identify underlying regularities, to relentlessly delve into the very essence of phenomena, and crucially, to derive a deep sense of pleasure from this very act of comprehension. This ability is profoundly integrated into the very fabric of our being. All these points, lines, triangles, and other fundamental geometric forms are, in essence, one of the primary ways in which we, in our mental representations, deconstruct matter into the simplest, most fundamental building blocks of reality. They represent the most basic forms that matter can assume. Indeed, try to conceive of something simpler than a triangle. If we are speaking of a closed, rectilinear figure, it is, by definition, impossible. By meticulously ascertaining the principles by which these most elementary blocks exist and interact, we can then begin to comprehend how the complex macrosystems composed of them operate. In this manner, we strive to extract the very essence of reality, to grasp its fundamental truths. And as you have undoubtedly gathered, this inherent drive to extract the core essence is not unique to humanity. It is a shared, fundamental characteristic found throughout the animal kingdom. Consider a carefully designed experiment involving a rat. The rat is repeatedly presented with the task of distinguishing a rectangle from a square. Each time the animal correctly approaches the rectangle, it receives a small, rewarding piece of cheese. Conversely, if it gravitates towards the square, it receives no such reward. After several dozen trials, the rat, through a process of trial and error and association, develops a clear understanding. The rectangle signifies food. It then ceases to pay attention to the square and consistently navigates only towards the rectangle. In essence, the rat has developed a preference for the rectangle. But here's the crucial next step. If you then present this same rat with a new rectangle, one that is significantly longer and thinner than the original rectangle it was trained on, the rat will now exhibit a stronger preference for this new rectangle, rather than the original one. Far from being foolish, the rat, in fact, demonstrates a remarkable degree of intelligence. and an acute capacity for generalization. It has grasped the very essence of the pattern, the underlying regularity of rectangularity. It chooses the second rectangle because, in its perception, it embodies more of what makes a rectangle distinct from a square, a greater degree of rectangularness, if you will. The more you amplify the contrast between the rectangle and the square, the more attractive the rectangle becomes to the discerning rat. This ability to extract the core essence, to identify and generalize fundamental patterns, is profoundly advantageous from an evolutionary perspective. It is, therefore, entirely unsurprising that we, and many other species, derive pleasure from this very act of discerning and comprehending underlying structures. Perhaps geometric figures, in their purest, most fundamental forms, appeal to us precisely because they represent the most basic geometry that can possibly exist, at least according to our human cognitive framework. It is likely for this same profound reason that we find caricatures so compelling and amusing. Have you ever truly pondered the astonishingly complex task involved in recognizing faces, and doing so with almost instantaneous precision? Most likely not, because for you this intricate cognitive process occurs with such effortless ease. The human brain, more than almost any other biological function, is evolutionarily honed and meticulously specialized for this very task. Many people tend to conceptualize the environment in which a biological organism exists as something composed primarily of abiotic factors, such as water, soil, and air. However, a vast and critically important component of the environment for almost any biological organism is, in fact, other biological organisms. For humans, an enormous and profoundly influential part of our environment consists of other human beings. It is entirely plausible, in fact, highly probable, that our ancient ancestors far more frequently met their demise at the hands of members of their own species than from any other predators. Consequently, we developed an almost unbelievable capacity for facial recognition, if for no other reason than to precisely differentiate between our own kin and strangers, friend and foe. Yet, despite the immense importance of this ability, human faces are, when objectively considered, remarkably similar. If one were to truly contemplate the matter, the subtle distinctions that differentiate one human face from another are often remarkably minute. Nevertheless, we very rarely, if ever, looking at faces, mistake one person for another. And consider this: over the course of a lifetime, we encounter millions of faces. For an extraterrestrial visitor, unaccustomed to our species, these faces would likely appear to be only faintly distinguishable from one another. From each individual face, our astonishing brain endeavors to extract the absolute, most fundamental essence, the core pattern, in order to reliably recognize it later. Caricatures, in this context, appeal to us precisely because they lighten this titanic cognitive load on the brain. A caricaturist, when depicting a figure like Nietzsche, adeptly extracts all the salient patterns and distinctive features that our brain utilizes to recognize the great philosopher, and then exaggerates them in their portrayal. In essence, the caricaturist might conceptually take the average of all male faces, subtract it from Nietzsche's face, and then amplify the resulting differences. In doing so, they create a portrait that, in a profound cognitive sense, is more like Nietzsche than Nietzsche himself. For precisely the same reason, we are captivated by films. They do not merely replicate reality in a documentary fashion. If they did, few would find them engaging. No one would willingly choose to observe mundane daily routines unfolding on a screen. A compelling story, meticulously crafted and presented in cinema, skillfully extracts the most crucial elements, discarding all the superfluous details. It provides a concentrated essence of reality, a distillation of experience that resonates more powerfully than unedited life. The same principle extends to books, games, visual art, and indeed every manifestation of human creativity. A significant number of theoretical physicists harbor the profound conviction that the real world, the ultimate underlying reality, is governed by a single, mathematically coherent, and intrinsically beautiful theory. This singular theory, they believe, must inherently permit the existence of a vibrant, diverse world, a multitude of complex phenomena, and a rich, unfolding history. This profound idea resonates deeply with the ancient philosophy articulated by Plato in his foundational work, The Republic. Plato famously contended that our sensory world, the world we perceive with our physical senses, is not truly real. It is merely a shadow, an imperfect reflection of a more fundamental, more real domain, the world of ideas or forms. When, for instance, you utter the word sofa without referring to any specific, tangible piece of furniture, and another person comprehends precisely what you are discussing, at that very moment, both of you are contemplating the sofa, not with your physical eyes, but with your minds. You are engaging with this idea of a sofa. All existing sofas, regardless of their individual appearance, their specific fabric, or their particular design, are merely imperfect projections, material manifestations, of that singular, ideal sofa, which exists not in our tangible world, but in the one true, ultimate reality of ideas. And as you have undoubtedly gathered, this profound world of ideas, this realm of pure forms, can only be apprehended and understood through the intellect, through the power of pure thought. While this concept might, at first, sound abstract or even counterintuitive to some, it is precisely physicists who have advanced Plato's original vision further than anyone else. When Max Tegmark, a physicist from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, posits that the universe is not merely well described by mathematics, but is, in its very essence, mathematics itself, what is this if not a direct continuation, a profound legacy, of Plato's foundational philosophy? It suggests a universe whose deepest structure is inherently logical and mathematical, accessible to the human mind through reason. However, Sabine Hossenfelder, with her characteristic pragmatism, argues that the notions of a multitude of universes, or a single unifying law of everything, remain for now merely beautiful dreams. They are possibilities, she contends, that may or may not ultimately prove to be true. She specifically criticizes the criterion of naturalness as an unreliable starting point for theoretical inquiry. In an interview for her book, the late Steven Weinberg, who, ironically, once claimed indifference to the interpretation of general relativity, responded to Hossenfelder's objections with a thoughtful, yet speculative counterargument. He posited, "I don't know, perhaps a true theory allows for the emergence of many Big Bangs in the early stage of the universe." He continued, "In these Big Bangs, occurring simultaneously, the physical constants differ significantly, and we will never be able to predict what they are in other Big Bangs from within our own. It is not excluded that there is an unlimited number of Big Bangs, and the values of the physical constants in our particular Big Bang are simply those that happen to randomly occur. This, he suggests, would naturally explain the unnaturalness of our universe's parameters. This perspective presents a stark dichotomy. Either the universe is fundamentally unnatural, meaning its parameters are arbitrarily fixed by chance, or the multiverse exists. There is, in this view, no third option. If we are unable to detect supersymmetric particles in the Large Hadron Collider, then, according to this line of reasoning, we must, by logical deduction, reside within a multiverse. This, Hossenfelder notes, represents the viewpoint of many physicists today. V.S. Ramachandran, an eminent professor of psychology and neurophysiology at the University of California, in his insightful book, The Telltale Brain, meticulously explores the profound challenge of discovering universal laws of aesthetics. He posits that these laws do not always possess an independent, standalone function. Rather, they may in many instances be merely incidental byproducts, unintended consequences, of other underlying biological or cognitive laws that do but serve a direct evolutionary purpose. Indeed, at times it might even appear that certain aesthetic principles contradict each other to an absurd degree. For example, one might intuitively assume that for a heterosexual male, a completely unclothed female form would be perceived as maximally attractive. However, in reality, the opposite is often true. A partially concealed body, rather than a fully exposed one, more effectively activates our visual processing centers and is often perceived as significantly more alluring. This phenomenon applies equally to both sexes. We exhibit a preference for such partial concealment because our brains are fundamentally wired to enjoy solving puzzles. Perception itself, Ramachandran argues, is far more akin to a problem-solving exercise than most people realize. The act of solving a puzzle, whether it be a purely intellectual challenge like a crossword or a logical riddle, or even a purely visual one like identifying a camouflaged object, often provides a subtle sense of pleasure even before the solution is fully grasped. Without this intrinsic motivation, this preemptive reward, we would, as a species, likely abandon most challenging tasks far too quickly. Consider the arduous problems faced by our ancestors. How to convince a potential mate to return to your cave and gaze at your fire, or how to relentlessly pursue that elusive prey through tall grass and a dense fog. Without an innate drive to solve these problems, a partial satisfaction in the pursuit itself, our species would have succumbed to the challenges of survival. The Telltale Brain is the second book I extensively utilized in crafting this monologue. While I've only acknowledged it explicitly just now, its profound insights permeate the entire narrative, from its very beginning to its conclusion. It was specifically Ramachandran's deep dive into the neurophysiology of perception that enabled me, to the fullest extent possible, to unravel and comprehend the enigmatic and often contradictory concept of beauty. It is a concept so fraught with paradox that our brain simultaneously embraces and, perhaps surprisingly, loathes coincidence. Consider this image, a seemingly random arrangement of 3 circles, each with an identical Pac-Man-shaped cutout. Your brain immediately engages in an internal calculation. What is the probability that these 3 circles, with their identical missing wedges, are positioned in precisely this manner purely by chance? The answer, your brain implicitly asserts, is not a chance. This is incredibly unlikely, far too suspicious a coincidence. It demands a simpler, more overarching explanation. And that explanation emerges, a solid white triangle, visually occluding parts of the 3 black discs. This interpretation is far more plausible, far more natural. And so you perceive a triangle, even though no actual lines are drawn to define it. Your brain, so exquisitely honed for puzzle solving, renders a judgment about what is more probable, what is less, even without your conscious participation. In the wild, attributing a seemingly random event to a deeper, non-random cause, even if incorrect, is often a life-saving heuristic. Consider, for a moment, 2 contrasting scenarios. Which of these 2 situations would unconsciously trigger a sense of wariness or alarm within you? The answer, intuitively, is obvious. The human brain abhors coincidences that it cannot readily interpret or explain. Yet, on the other hand, Imagine a picture hanging slightly askew on a wall. An immediate, disproportionately negative reaction arises, far exceeding the actual magnitude of the deviation. Or, a drawer that refuses to close completely due to a tiny piece of paper jammed and protruding. Or, an envelope meticulously sealed with a single hair accidentally caught and adhering to the glue. Or, a minuscule fleck of lint marring an otherwise impeccably tailored suit. Why do all these minor imperfections elicit such profound feelings of displeasure? Some of these reactions might be attributed to elementary hygiene, a composite of instinctive and learned behaviors. The desire to remove a stray piece of lint from a child's hair, for instance, might have deep roots in the instinctive grooming behaviors observed in primates. Other examples, such as a crookedly hanging picture or an uneven stack of books, seem to point to an innate, hardwired necessity within our brains for order, for correctness, or for predictability, a fundamental drive to impose order upon chaos. Thus, we discern a profound convergence. The pursuit of beauty, in its deepest sense, often leads us to the very same choices and preferences that are fundamentally useful and adaptive for our survival and well-being. Jules-Henri Poincaré, the brilliant French physicist and mathematician, perhaps most renowned for his groundbreaking discovery of deterministic chaos, made a profound observation that intertwines these concepts. Sabine Hossenfelder, in her provocative book Lost in Math, makes an utterly scandalous claim that Karl Popper's venerable idea, the principle that scientific theories must be falsifiable, meaning they must be capable of being disproven by experiment, has long since become an outdated and impractical criterion for modern science. Moreover, she argues that in reality, this principle has rarely, if ever, been truly applied in the field, except as a rhetorical device. The sobering truth, she contends, is that genuinely and definitively refuting a theory proves to be an exceedingly rare accomplishment. Consequently, instead of definitively falsifying theories, what we actually do, Hossenfelder explains, is gradually render them implausible. A theory that is continuously being reconfigured, perpetually adjusted to accommodate contradictory data, progressively becomes more intricate, more convoluted, and, one might even say, less aesthetically appealing, less beautiful. Eventually, its adherents, faced with an ever-growing edifice of complex additions and adjustments, simply lose interest. The time required to render an idea implausible, she notes, is directly proportional to the prevailing, quote, tolerance for repeated adjustments of the theory to fit contradictory data. Sabine Hossenfelder, I reiterate, is absolutely incandescent in her critique. In essence, this iterative process of patching and tweaking, rather than outright refutation, is precisely what she believes is currently transpiring with the hypothesis of supersymmetry. So let us delve into the profound significance of symmetry. This damned symmetry is one of the most critical principles deeply ingrained within the very structure of our brains, and it holds immense importance throughout the natural world. Why is it so crucial? Because significant biological objects, whether they be prey animals, dangerous predators, or potential mates of one's own species, all share a common, defining characteristic. They are, to a remarkable degree, symmetrical. This fundamental observation elegantly explains why symmetry so powerfully captures our attention and stimulates our cognitive and emotional responses. Similarly, it illuminates why artists and architects, across cultures and epochs, have been able to employ symmetry with such consistent success, creating works that universally resonate with a sense of balance and harmony. This inherent preference for symmetry is evident from the earliest stages of human development. A newborn infant, for instance, will instinctively fixate on symmetrical ink blots rather than asymmetrical ones. This innate preference, observed even in the youngest of us, testifies to a fundamental infant law, a pre-programmed cognitive rule that seems to declare something symmetrical. That seems important. It warrants further observation. A second evolutionary reason for our deep-seated appreciation of symmetry is more subtle, more elusive. Psychologists, presenting a randomized sequence of faces with varying degrees of symmetry to graduate students, discovered a consistent pattern. The most symmetrical faces were invariably rated as the most attractive. This finding in itself is hardly surprising. However, what proved truly interesting was the observation that even the most minute deviations from perfect symmetry were often perceived as distinctly unappealing. Why this exquisite sensitivity, this intolerance for even the slightest imperfection in symmetry? The answer, as it turns out, we owe to the ubiquitous presence of parasites. Parasitic infections can dramatically diminish an individual's fertility and overall reproductive success. Consequently, evolution has conferred a significant advantage, a high reward, upon the capacity to accurately discern whether a potential mate is infected. If the infection occurred during gestation or early childhood, one of the most subtle, yet telling, external indicators of this compromised health is precisely an almost imperceptible asymmetry in physical features. Therefore, symmetry serves as a powerful, ancient marker of robust health, which, in turn, is a reliable indicator of reproductive fitness and overall attractiveness. Is the profound, deep-seated human necessity to avoid parasites somehow connected to the whimsical, architectural caprice of the magnificent Mughal emperor who decreed the construction of the exquisitely symmetrical Taj Mahal as a sublime symbol of eternal love? And is this same biological imperative linked to the almost obsessive commitment of scientists to the pursuit of symmetrical equations? Why not? The human brain, in its remarkable plasticity, is entirely capable of utilizing the same neural regions, the same cognitive pathways, for both tangible real-world experiences and abstract concepts. For example, it has been experimentally confirmed that the feeling of moral revulsion towards a contemptible act and the visceral feeling of disgust towards spoiled food both activate the exact same regions of the brain. This suggests a deep, underlying connection between our physical and moral judgments. Let us consider this from an alternative perspective. My mother, with her characteristic pragmatism, often quips that symmetry is aesthetics for the dull-witted. Now, if I were to assert to you that a truly beautiful and fundamental theory, one that truly describes the cosmos, is in fact inherently chaotic and profoundly asymmetrical, that statement might, at first, sound unconvincing, perhaps even absurd. However, this assertion would gradually sound more and more compelling each time you heard it. Research consistently demonstrates that we tend to perceive a statement as truer, more veridical, the more frequently we are exposed to it. This cognitive phenomenon is known as the attentional bias, or the familiarity effect. What is both fascinating and, depending on one's perspective, rather disheartening, is that this effect operates even when the repeated assertion comes from the exact same individual. The truth, perhaps, is that chaos, in a subtle and nuanced way, possesses a beauty that transcends rigid symmetries. Have you not yet fully embraced this provocative assertion? Why are certain deviations, such as a picture hanging askew, considered unattractive, while other forms of asymmetry, say, an exquisitely placed beauty mark on a person's face, are perceived as highly attractive? A birthmark positioned precisely in the middle of the chin or nose, for instance, is indeed often not perceived as favorably. Ramachandran, in his work, acknowledges that we do not yet possess a definitive answer to this apparent contradiction. It is possible that the explanation lies in our inherent preference for a delicate balance, a nuanced equilibrium, between dull, predictable order and overwhelming, terrifying chaos. Ultimately, novelty itself is beautiful, but only if it does not demand an excessive cognitive load from the perceiver. We desire to be surprised, to encounter the unexpected, but not to an overwhelming degree. And you would be astonished by how much of your daily life, how many of your preferences and reactions are governed by this precise formula. In your school years, you invariably and acutely recognized the precise moment when a teacher articulated something that was already perfectly clear and understood. You also distinctly recognized the moment when a teacher introduced a truly novel concept, and you comprehended it with crystalline clarity, seamlessly integrating new knowledge into your existing understanding. And then there was that irritating, frustrating moment when you completely ceased to understand the subject matter, plunging into a state of total, bewildering meaninglessness. Yet once you painstakingly deciphered the concepts, once you grasped the underlying logic, you experienced a profound rush of pleasure, a deep satisfaction born from finally imposing control over intellectual chaos. This delicate balance, this perpetual negotiation between order and disorder, is precisely where modern physics currently finds itself, or is on the verge of finding itself. Such are the formidable rules of this intellectual game. If your aspiration is to discover a theory of everything, then your aesthetic sensibilities, your innate sense of beauty, are arguably the single most critical tool you must rigorously refine and work with. Garrett Lisi, the American theoretical physicist, whose work explores the connections between fundamental physics and exceptional Lie algebras, embodies this philosophy. And the situation would not be so acutely problematic if we were solely constrained by universal, objectively verifiable criteria of beauty. However, it very often transpires that what one individual perceives as profoundly interesting and beautiful, another dismisses as mundane or unappealing. Why do we, as ordinary individuals, experience a sense of intellectual irritation or blank incomprehension when confronted with Maxwell's equations, those elegant formulations of electromagnetism? Yet Frank Wilczek, a Nobel laureate, in his book, describes their beauty as utterly beyond words. Ludwig Boltzmann, another towering figure in physics, contemplating Maxwell's equations, famously exclaimed, "Was it a god who traced these lines?" Why do a staggering 99% of physicists regard Einstein's general theory of relativity as one of the most beautiful theories in the entire history of science, while an equally vast 99% of the planet's population, even with the greatest desire, are simply incapable of comprehending it to a sufficient degree? This profound disparity in perception might be explained by the hypothesis of neural efficiency. Research consistently demonstrates that the brains of individuals with higher IQs exhibit less activity and consume less glucose when performing tasks of moderate complexity. Conversely, these same brains display greater activity when tackling genuinely complex problems, compared to individuals with lower IQs. This strongly suggests that more intelligent individuals are capable of utilizing their brains with greater efficiency, optimizing their neural resources. If an individual is fortunate enough to possess this inherent cognitive advantage, they can playfully grasp intricate concepts and perceive them as inherently appealing. As we have already established, every brain delights in balancing on the precipice between simplicity and complexity. And yes, more brilliant brains, more highly refined intellects, tend to find greater aesthetic pleasure in more complex and nuanced intellectual challenges. Ramachandran notes that Albert Einstein possessed an unusually large angular gyrus, a specific region of the brain. This anatomical peculiarity, he speculates, likely enabled Einstein to integrate his computational and spatial reasoning abilities in such an extraordinary manner, a way that we, as mere mortals, can scarcely begin to imagine. For approximately a decade, Einstein dedicated himself to the arduous task of developing his monstrously complex theory of gravity. No one, absolutely no one, would embark on such a monumental intellectual undertaking without deriving profound pleasure, a deep intrinsic satisfaction, from the very act of creation. As Frank Wilczek profoundly stated, if the laws were not beautiful, we would not have found them, and perhaps therein lies the very crux of the problem. Science, a discipline that, ideally, should be immune to the fickle influences of the human factor, has, up until now, often advanced precisely because of this very factor, this inherent human drive towards beauty and elegance. But what if this guiding principle, this aesthetic compass, ceases to be a reliable guide? What if it leads us astray? Hossenfelder, in her deeply contemplative work, writes that she already knows that the world embodies beautiful ideas. Therefore, her profound desire is to ascertain whether it also embodies ugly ones. It is entirely possible that humanity is destined to grasp only a multitude of small, localized truths, rather than one grand overarching truth about the universe. Perhaps the most fundamental reality is simply too chaotic, too intrinsically disordered, for our limited human minds to fully comprehend. Many of our uniquely human psychological traits, our distinctive cognitive abilities, undoubtedly emerged through the unconventional development of brain structures that originally evolved for entirely different, unrelated purposes. This phenomenon, known as exaptation, occurs frequently and consistently throughout the grand tapestry of evolution. Feathers, for instance, originally evolved from scales, their primary function not flight but rather thermal insulation. The wings of bats and pterodactyls are exquisite modifications of anterior limbs, structures initially designed for terrestrial locomotion. Our own lungs, those vital organs of respiration, evolved from the swim bladders of fish, organs whose original function was solely to regulate buoyancy. Evolution has repeatedly discovered ingenious ways to radically repurpose the functions of many primate brain structures, giving rise to entirely novel and groundbreaking capabilities. Language, for example, proved to be such an extraordinarily powerful cognitive tool that the species it ultimately created, ourselves, surpasses its primate ancestors in terms of its impact and capabilities, much as life itself transcends the mere interplay of ordinary chemistry and physics. And our profound, almost innate love for engaging in scientific inquiry likely blossomed from a synergistic interplay of equally ancient, deeply rooted drives. We must, therefore, diligently strive to understand the genesis of these drives. We must comprehend our own cognitive biases, our often unconscious motivations, and the fundamental limitations inherent in our perceptual and conceptual frameworks if we are to truly progress. To fully comprehend the universe, we must, first and foremost, endeavor to comprehend ourselves. To truly understand physics, we must also possess a deep understanding of biology, psychology, and sociology. Quantum mechanics, for all its astonishing success and predictive power, operates with an almost unnerving effectiveness. Yet, many physicists lament that it is inherently unintuitive, often defying common sense, and, in a strange way, perceived as, quote, ugly. Is this not, perhaps, because we, as a species, did not evolve to perceive the phenomena of the quantum world as inherently comprehensible or harmonious? Is the universe truly obligated, at all its various conceptual levels, to satisfy our deeply ingrained aesthetic demands, our human preferences for elegance and simplicity? The concept of naturalness, for example, has been employed as a guiding principle in the development of scientific theories since at least the 16th century. And yes, at times, this principle has indeed proven to be remarkably successful, leading to profound insights. But at other times, it has demonstrably led astray. The same applies to the monumental proof of Fermat's last theorem by Andrew Wiles, a groundbreaking achievement first announced in 1993. The problem statement itself is astonishingly simple and elegant, a paragon of mathematical conciseness. Yet the proof itself is nothing short of an intellectual odyssey, a staggering testament to human ingenuity, an incredibly complex 129-page manuscript, utterly devoid of any inherent simplicity or brevity. In the vast history of science, it is far from difficult to unearth examples of theories and proofs that were undoubtedly beautiful but ultimately incorrect. Conversely, there are numerous instances of theories that were complex and seemingly inelegant, yet profoundly correct. The connection between beauty and truth, it is entirely plausible, exists solely within the confines of our own minds, between our ears, a product of our unique cognitive architecture. Furthermore, expanding upon the idea of the subjective perception of beauty, it is worth noting that even many of the most brilliant and eminent scientists have, at times, held diametrically opposed views regarding which theories to label beautiful. The scientific work of Heisenberg, for example, did not, by any stretch of the imagination, consistently convey an impression of elegance to all his contemporaries. Erwin Schrödinger, another titan of quantum mechanics, famously remarked, "Of course I knew about his theory. However, I was put off, if not repulsed, by the methods of transcendental algebra, which seemed to me very difficult, and by the lack of visualizability." Nor was Heisenberg particularly complimentary regarding Schrödinger's own ideas. In a letter to Wolfgang Pauli, Heisenberg wrote, "The more I reflect on the physical side of Schrödinger's theory, the more repulsive it seems to me. What Schrödinger writes about the visualizability of his theory is rubbish." Ultimately, both approaches, Heisenberg's abstract matrix mechanics and Schrödinger's more intuitive wave mechanics, became integral parts of a unified quantum theory. One might retrospectively argue that this very unification, this synthesis of disparate perspectives, was itself a form of profound beauty. However, let us consider another illuminating example. Neil Turok, a prominent cosmologist, dismisses the idea of the multiverse as fanciful, unnatural, untestable, and ultimately dangerous for science and society. From Turok's perspective, the multiverse hypothesis is a complete catastrophe. The American theoretical physicist Joseph Polchinski, grappling with the implications and plausibility of the multiverse, reportedly drove himself to such a state of intellectual distress that he sought psychiatric help. This is not a humorous exaggeration. Conversely, Leonard Susskind, another leading theoretical physicist, finds the notion that the universe might be far vaster, richer, and more diverse than we had ever conceived to be profoundly thrilling and inspiring. Bernard Carr posits that the very concept of the multiverse necessitates a new understanding of the nature of science itself, and it is therefore unsurprising that such a paradigm shift evokes intellectual discomfort. Max Tegmark asserts that opponents of the multiverse are emotionally prejudiced against the idea of displacing humanity from its central privileged position in the cosmic narrative. And Adam Siegfried muses that the criticism leveled against the multiverse hypothesis is of the same ilk as that which compelled some 19th-century scientists and philosophers to deny the very existence of atoms, simply because they were unobservable. To definitively resolve this endless debate of subjective taste, what is truly needed are experiments. For nearly 2 millennia, 2,000 years stretching back to the time of Aristotle, people generally believed that heavier objects fell to the earth faster than lighter ones. This conviction was based on, well, an intensely intuitive, almost self-evident understanding. Some of you, even now might find yourselves surprised, perhaps wondering, wait, isn't that true? But then came Galileo. With a simple experiment, one that a 10-year-old schoolchild could easily replicate, he conclusively overturned 2,000 years of abstract wisdom that was founded upon our deeply ingrained internal preconceptions about order and natural behavior. He demonstrated, with undeniable clarity, that objects of different weights fall at the same rate when other factors are accounted for. And so, it is precisely this absence of experimental data confirming supersymmetry that has led to a growing chorus of critics of this hypothesis, even among its former enthusiastic proponents. Mikhail Schiffman, a distinguished theorist, as early as October 2012, published a scathing critical article in which he explicitly declared that the theory of supersymmetry was unpromising, that it should be abandoned in favor of new ideas, and for the sake of a new generation of theoretical physicists, lest they become a lost generation, trapped in a fruitless intellectual endeavor. Recall the words of George Ellis, the honorary professor from the University of Cape Town, from earlier in this monologue, regarding his assertion that a weakening of the requirement for testability would cast science back 1,000 years. He made this observation during an interview with Sabine Hossenfelder for her book, and during that same conversation he articulated another thought that, even now, might stir indignation in a significant portion of those listening. He contends that contemporary scientists profoundly overestimate the boundaries of science and possess a strikingly poor understanding of both what science is capable of achieving and what it cannot. When Stephen Hawking, for instance, proclaims that God did not create the universe, is this a scientific assertion or a philosophical one? If it is truly a scientific claim, then where is the empirical evidence, the experimental data that supports such a definitive conclusion? When Victor Stenger pens a book asserting that science has disproven the existence of God, yet fails to describe any experimental apparatus within its pages that yielded such a result, a fundamental question arises. What precisely does Stenger mean by the term science in this context? When Lawrence Krauss, assuming the role of an ambassador for science, participates in debates concerning the existence or non-existence of God, and conducts them in such a manner that, by the end, everyone is metaphorically attempting to drink from an empty glass, ostensibly proving the existence of nothingness from his own book's arguments. How much scientific credibility does this add to his stature as a scholar? There is absolutely nothing inherently wrong with either affirming or denying the existence of God. Every individual, and specifically every scientist, is entitled to their own metaphysical position. But this, crucially, falls within the domain of philosophy, not science. If one wishes to argue for a philosophical position, then one requires rigorous logic and compelling arguments. And in the arena of attempts to scientifically prove or disprove the existence of God, there has been nothing genuinely new for 2.5 centuries, since the time of David Hume, who brilliantly argued that science can neither prove nor disprove such an existence. Hume, observing the intellectual landscape, would likely be perplexed as to why his opponents continually resort to rhetorical devices rather than substantive arguments. All right, granted, I personally consider much of this rhetoric to be utter nonsense, but let us for a moment entertain the idea that these scientific debates about God serve as a kind of litmus test. They illustrate quite powerfully how the often disdainful attitude of many contemporary scientists towards philosophy inadvertently leads them down two problematic paths. On the one hand, they attempt to reinvent the wheel, unwittingly rediscovering philosophical concepts that have been explored for centuries. On the other hand, it leads them to an unconscious, unexamined faith in subjective criteria such as the concept of beauty in their scientific endeavors. George Ellis is one of the few individuals mentioned in Hossenfelder's book with whom she wholeheartedly agrees. She firmly believes that a concerted collaboration between physicists and robust, insightful philosophers, combined with a disciplined awareness among scientists of elementary cognitive biases, would undoubtedly propel scientific progress forward with a qualitative leap. By the way, the author of Lost in Math, Sabine Hossenfelder, maintains her own YouTube channel. So, if you are interested and possess a reasonable understanding of English, I extend a cordial invitation to explore her work. Richard Feynman, the celebrated physicist and Nobel laureate, articulated a fundamental principle that echoes through the halls of scientific inquiry. It doesn't matter how beautiful your theory is, it doesn't matter how smart you are. If it doesn't agree with experiment, it's wrong. This unwavering commitment to empirical verification stands as the ultimate arbiter of scientific truth, and it is, ultimately, females who choose. Sexual selection has played a pivotal, indeed a fundamental, role in the evolution of nearly all living organisms on Earth, and its influence is particularly pronounced in the development of Homo sapiens. The astonishingly rapid and dramatic expansion of the human brain is, to a significant extent, directly attributed to the relentless pressures of this very form of selection. It is widely hypothesized that the cognitive capacities of the human brain far exceed what would have been strictly necessary for mere survival within the savanna environments where our early ancestors roamed. Imagine for a moment our ancient ancestors living 100,000 years ago. Their brains, it is conjectured, possessed the inherent capacity to grasp the complexities of quantum mechanics at a level comparable to our own. But for what evolutionary purpose? One compelling explanation posits that the very manifestation of our brain's extraordinary capabilities is, in essence, the equivalent of a human peacock's tail, an absurdly elaborate display of intellectual prowess. Recalling the intricate nests of the pufferfish, the bizarre architectural installations of the bowerbird, and the mesmerizing dances and songs of the birds of paradise, my mind immediately draws parallels to the archetypal narratives of human infatuation, the enduring allure of musicians, poets, and artists. Of course, in human societies, the dynamics of attraction are immensely more complex and multifaceted. However, the fundamental underlying principle, the core mechanism, is likely not as dissimilar as one might initially assume. It is conceivable that at a crucial juncture in our evolutionary history, the females of our ancestral species became so profoundly captivated by manifestations of intelligence, by the ability to solve complex problems, to communicate effectively, to create and innovate, that they were willing to undertake immense risks, even the life-threatening perils of childbirth, simply to ensure that their offspring inherited a similar intellectual capacity, both literally in terms of brain size and metaphorically in terms of cognitive ability, as the male. This process, while certainly a gradual one, was nevertheless remarkably swift by evolutionary standards. And it is precisely this rapid, almost explosive expansion of cranial capacity that makes human childbirth such a challenging and often dangerous endeavor, hardly an elegant solution from nature's design perspective. Indeed, the maintenance of such large human brains entails significant biological costs. I anticipate potential objections to this line of reasoning, so let me clarify. A strong belief is deeply ingrained in our society that it is primarily men who choose women. However, this perception is, in fact, not entirely accurate. If you find yourself puzzled as to why, in the natural world, it is typically females who make the choices, rather than males, the answer is, from a biological standpoint, quite straightforward. For a female, the process of reproduction is, firstly, inherently dangerous, and secondly, significantly more resource-intensive. The number of offspring that a single female can produce is severely limited, in stark contrast to a male who, given the opportunity, could potentially father an entire division of descendants. Therefore, even in populations where the ratio of men to women is roughly equal, an incomparably greater number of males, on average, competes for the attention and reproductive opportunities of a single female compared to the number of females vying for a single male. Men propose, but women choose. And those males who are chosen by a significant number of females are the ones whose traits are perpetuated. The others, for the most part, are evolutionarily cold. This phenomenon is further and partially corroborated by the striking observation that humans have a significantly greater number of female ancestors than male ancestors. The evolutionary psychologist Roy Baumeister, in his thought-provoking book, Is There Anything Good About Men?, notes that research consistently indicates that humans possess twice as many female ancestors as male ancestors. This implies that a vast proportion of men who have ever lived on this planet simply failed to leave any descendants. You might reasonably inquire, how is such a stark disparity possible, especially if the ratio of men to women is approximately equal? The explanation lies in this fundamental dynamic. On average, and I emphasize asterisk on average, almost every adult woman in history has had at least one child. However, while some men fathered children with multiple women, a substantial portion of men left no offspring whatsoever. While the precise mathematical details are undoubtedly more complex, this rough illustration vividly demonstrates how such a disproportionate ancestral lineage could have arisen. In a broad sense, it can be argued that evolution conducts its experiments primarily on males, because in the event of a successful mutation or advantageous trait, a single male can potentially produce a vast number of offspring, thereby rapidly disseminating that trait throughout the population. The reverse, however, is not true, and yes, this, as I asserted, is largely the very mechanism through which we evolved our almost magical intellectual capabilities. The fact that, in nature, females choose is indeed a truth, but it is, nevertheless, a somewhat loudly stated generalization. This is because it is not, of course, a conscious, rationalized process. Consider the female pufferfish or the bowerbird. Something intrinsic within them simply resonates with what they perceive. What is this something, and why does it operate in this manner? That, truly, is the fascinating question. And humans, too, significantly overstate the conscious component in their own lives. Women, for example, often do not precisely know why they fall in love. It is a process that largely transcends their conscious control. If my male audience currently entertains the notion that every woman is searching for a partner from a world of platonic ideals, a perfect male who simply does not exist in our imperfect, sublunary reality, then what of this even more intriguing example of enigmatic aesthetic preferences? Consider the astonishing observation that female guppyfish consistently prefer males who are painted blue, despite the fact that guppies themselves are not naturally blue. This appears to be a peculiar, almost whimsical quirk of their neural wiring, an arbitrary aesthetic preference. If, by some improbable chance, a spontaneous mutation were to occur, resulting in a single blue guppy, one could confidently predict, over the course of the next several millennia, the emergence of a new race of guppies that would evolve to possess an increasingly vivid, almost uselessly intense, blue coloration. Females transmit to their offspring not only the specific qualities that attracted them to a partner, but also, crucially, their innate preference for those very qualities. Ultimately, the final arbiter, the supreme examiner, is, of course, reality itself and the relentless pressures of natural selection. Through maladaptive sexual selection, a species can, astonishingly, even face extinction. This, for instance, is believed to have been the fate of the saber-toothed tiger. During the Ice Age, they were deprived of their customary prey, large mammals, including mammoths. Their absurdly oversized canine teeth, which, according to one theory, were purely decorative and existed solely to attract females, rendered them incapable of effectively hunting smaller game. This critical inability to adapt to changing food sources ultimately led to their gradual but inevitable demise. However, if a species manages to survive for an extended period, it strongly suggests that this species has, through its adaptations and behaviors, grasped something fundamentally important about reality, something that enables it to continue to exist. Much like our architectural structures that do not collapse because they are founded upon deep, robust theoretical principles, so too are we. We are, in essence, an embodied theory of the world, a living, breathing hypothesis that to some degree accurately conforms to the fundamental laws by which the world operates. This embodied theory, however, is far from complete. If you were to represent a complete, unified theory of the world, you would be capable of living in any conceivable environment, and indeed, you might even be able to live forever. It is possible that we are currently bogged down in the foundations of physics, having reached the ultimate limits of what the human mind is, in principle, capable of comprehending. We do not know the precise depth to which our genetic inheritance allows us to penetrate the very essence of the cosmos. Yet considering that Homo sapiens is, arguably, the most successful species on the planet, a testament to the selective nature of our women, a certain degree of understanding is undeniably within our grasp. As David Hume, the brilliant Scottish philosopher, wisely posited, the cause or causes of order in the universe probably bear some remote analogy to human intelligence. You have assembled the puzzle. Thank you for your viewership, and my deepest gratitude to those who provide their continued support.